Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Author Journey. I'm Anne O'Connell with OC Publishing, and we're going to have a lot of fun today. We have a guest returning. I have a few guests that are coming back because they're just doing so much amazing stuff and new books coming out. So today's guest is Bruce Bishop, who after about 23 years as a freelance travel and lifestyle writer, Canadian Bruce Bishop began to write fiction at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in early 2020. It's nice when we hear about folks who made the best of not a great situation, right? In the subsequent 3 years, this is very impressive, he wrote and self-published a 20th century historical fiction trilogy, not one, but 3 books: Unconventional Daughters, Uncommon Sons, and Undeniable Relations, and then decided to write a 4th novel not connected to the first 3. And his 4th novel just recently came out, Grow Up, Rory Rafferty. Look at that gorgeous cover. We'll talk a little bit about cover design and things like that with Bruce too. A little bit about Grow Up, Rory Rafferty. In 1979, when an introverted young man with culinary aspirations comes of age in Toronto after taking his first job at a private women's club, he risks being devoured by the city's elite. I lived in Toronto for 3 years, shortly after that, actually. It's a life-affirming, heartwarming novel with a protagonist who wonders if he has a sexual identity and later finds his best friend, himself. It's for readers who love nostalgia and for young adults who are curious about what their parents may have really been like in the disco era, one of my favorite eras. I remember dancing on the colored floors with the disco ball. So Bruce's recent book just released, Grow Up, Rory Rafferty, and I'm going to bring Bruce up to join me, and we'll talk all about his author journey. Hey, Bruce.
Hi, Anne. How you doing?
Good. Welcome back. And I was
Thank
going to
you.
say, I do have your 3 previous books. There's 2, and then I have one on my Kindle. So one of these days I'll get a hard copy from you as well.
For sure. Yeah.
But congratulations on the launch of Grow Up, Rory Rafferty.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it feels like a long time coming, but it's a little over a year, I suppose, that I got the idea and decided to write it. But it's always fun to be anticipating a new release and see how it goes.
I'm in awe of you starting to write, novels in 2020, and now it's 2024 and it's your 4th book. I'm very proud of you. I'm very excited for you.
Well, unlike yourself, I don't have a publishing company to worry about. I mean, I'm the publishing company for me. You're a publishing company for so many talented people. So I'm in
Oh,
awe
thank
of
you.
what you do, and in the fact that you're writing a sequel to Deep Deceit, and I'm
Oh,
looking
thank you.
forward to seeing that out in the spring of
Oh,
2025.
thank you for the plug. I did not pay him to say that, but I am excited about that as well. It has been a long time coming. So let's talk a little bit about, this is number 4, as we said, and it's a little bit of a shift. And actually, before I forget, this some early readers have compared it to Heartstopper, which was a graphic novel that's been made into a Netflix series. Like, how does that feel? That's pretty high praise.
Very much so, yeah. Heartstopper is just, I mean, it's a graphic novel by Alice Osman, who, or which flew off the shelves, especially with younger readers, a couple of years back. And of course, most people would know Heartstopper as a Netflix 3-season series, which she is very involved with as far as the writing goes. So I was pleasantly surprised to hear that the emotions, I guess, evoked from reading Rory Rafferty for a few people was the same emotions that people are getting from Heartstopper. Interestingly enough, the people who I've noticed that are commenting online about Heartstopper aren't so much maybe the younger crowd. Of course, they're there too, but older people my age and maybe 10 years younger who have often felt unrecognized or dismissed as quote unquote queer people. And Heartstopper is a very life affirming, gender affirming, diverse storyline of high school seniors. So the fact that older people now are saying, gee, wouldn't it have been nice if my high school years were as diverse and as life affirming as the characters in Heartstopper. So if people can find a little bit of Heartstopper in Rory, I'm over the moon about that.
That's amazing. Well, let's talk about Rory. Okay, so here's your website. Tell us about sort of the basic storyline. I kind of top-lined it a little bit, but how did it come about? Because it's a little bit of a shift from your first 3 novels, although with some common themes, right?
Yeah, it's funny. This one does take place in 1979, so it's not yet quite historical because historical fiction is supposed to be 50 years and then further back in the past. So this isn't quite historical, but it's definitely nostalgic. And I'll tell you, and I think the reason why I wanted to write it is because of 2 forms of media that I saw when I was only a young teenager, pre-teenager myself. And one was Don Shabib's movie called Going Down the Road, which was about 2 kind of crazy Nova Scotians who do a road trip and decide to go to Toronto for their to find their fortune, so to speak. So that was one idea in mind, the whole idea of Nova Scotians always leaving to find their fortune somewhere else. And then the second idea that kind of twinned with this that the novel came out of was a movie put out in 1968. I didn't see it till several years later, from Italy, called Teorema. And it was about a kind of a mysterious stranger who shows up in the lives of a wealthy bourgeois family in Rome. And he ends up going to bed with everyone in the family at different times.
I think I remember that movie.
But including the housekeeper. So I thought, oh, okay. What does happen when a stranger walks into our lives, but ends up very quietly infiltrating everyone in the family? So that element is also in Rory Rafferty. But of course, it's mostly about this young guy's coming of age in Toronto in 1979 at the height of the disco era, and realizing that as kind of a wallflower, very, very shy type of person, while he was living in small town Nova Scotia, he kind of spreads his wings and realizes that, gee, I guess I'm an okay person. I guess I do have a sexual identity. And at that time, of course, he realizes he's gay and accepts the fact that he's gay. So, but again, I just love the idea that the people who have read it early on, whether it be the alpha readers at the beginning or beta readers later, or a few people I've asked to write testimonials, they get caught up in the time period and how different things were almost more innocent in the late 70s than they are today.
A little less, yeah, and you do have some pretty wonderful blurbs in the book from your advanced readers, and from the umbrella of all of your books, and diving right down. So what was your takeaway from some of these early reader, other than the Heartstopper comment, like some of the other thoughts?
Oh, well, just the fact that I wasn't sure what kind of an audience this would appeal to. And I'm still not sure because it's just out now and it's so brand new and available. But judging from the pre-orders and judging from friends and family who I've spoken to, it really does seem to run the gamut of maybe young adults, like I'm talking 18 to say 25, 30, to people my age who literally lived through that era and remember it well and were growing up in that era, having to have their first, or rather renting their first apartment, their first job, their first love, a lot of firsts for young adults. And of course, the major change of going from a small town, fish out of water, to a huge city.
Do you have an excerpt that you might like to read for us?
I didn't really prepare one in.
No,
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Didn't even think of it.
That's okay. Well, we'll just let's transition a little bit to the idea of, 4 books in 4 years. And truly, the only way to do that would be to self-publish.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about, I know that you also had sort of contemplated other avenues, and did some research into agency. Talk a little bit about that and how that evolved and how you made your decision to continue to self-publish.
Great question, because I think a lot of people that do decide that they want to write a novel, there's an awful lot of homework before you even begin to do that. I think it's perhaps preferable if you've published something before, whether it be a short story or in a literary journal or a magazine or a newspaper, or somewhere you've had an editor oversee your work to ensure that it's great for publication, or it's good for that, for an audience.
And I also want to make sure that people understand that, being familiar with Bruce's work and having read all of his books and knowing the process he's gone through, your books are very thoroughly edited, and you use professional designers. So, make sure you include that in sort of some of this.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important. You, first of all, you'd have to treat it as any business. I mean, let's say if I decided, gee, I think I'd like to have a landscaping company. Well, boy, you sure better like working outside, but even more so being brought up to date about the type of equipment to be used, and effective procedures and all that kind of stuff. You just don't suddenly decide to become a landscaper, right?
Right.
Just like you don't just suddenly decide to write a novel. As you say, it to have a book out once a year, you can really only do that by self-publishing. Self-publishing, as you did just mention, does mean to hire the book cover designer, to hire the editors, to sometimes, if you can afford it, hire a publicist or a marketing team. It's all up to you. You're in 100% control, and you decide where it will be distributed and how much you will market it.
Yeah, and which is both the upside and the downside, right?
Exactly. Because I think a lot of writers are quite introverted. So to even do something like this, being interviewed on video, would scare the daylights out of some people, but it's such a necessary thing these days. We have to market ourselves almost as a brand, but besides the book, but also online, and it's just part of the deal. But anyway, just to further on your other comment about traditional publishing and getting an agent, yes, I certainly did explore that to a great extent with the first book, Unconventional Daughters, because I thought that was the only way to do it. I had to somehow get a literary agent to take my project to a traditional publisher, and then the traditional publisher, traditional publisher would then put the book together and sell it for me. Well, you've got very often it's like getting a lottery win to do it that way. So after trying it for the first book, I did go back and I revisited that whole idea of trying to get a literary agent either in Canada or in the US for this fourth book, thinking, well, I've got 3 under my belt. Hey, they're gonna roll out the red carpet for me. All these literary agents will just be delighted. Yeah, no. That's, again, not how it works, because publishing has changed so much since the advent of self-publishing. So these poor literary agents are literally flooded every single day with queries from people wanting to be represented, so that those new authors, a lot of them are debut authors, they don't want to do the heavy lifting, the hard work of actually self-publishing and then marketing. So yeah, it's been a voyage, but hey, as I say, it's a business. So if I didn't do it as professionally as I possibly could, then there's not much sense in doing it at all, in my opinion.
Right. And let's have a further look at your revised website. So you've made a lot of changes on this since the the last book came out,
Yes.
and you have some great opportunities here. Talk a little bit about making things available to the media, right? And how you do that.
Well, like you, I've had experience in public relations and media
Mm-hmm.
relations, and I know that there's nothing that drives in the old days you would just say a newspaper reporter or a magazine writer, drives them crazy when trying to find out more about a writer, if the writer doesn't have accessible information and
Right.
images to which the the writer can use.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be, if in many companies, they would have a media library that you would have to sign in and use a password and all that sort of thing,
Right.
even just to use their photographs.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're your own brand, if you are an author who's self-publishing, then damn it, get some decent pictures of yourself.
Yeah.
Find out how to write a press release. Put all that plus good looking visuals of your books. Put all that on your website that's easily accessible to people
Mm-hmm.
like Anne,
Mm-hmm.
who do take the time to find out about authors and their work. It
For
just speeds
interviews.
up the process so much.
Mm-hmm.
It really does.
And ideally, and as a publisher myself, I make those kinds of things available for my authors, but that doesn't mean there shouldn't still be a website. But this is in particularly critical for somebody who is self-publishing.
Oh yeah.
So talk about, you say right at the top here, my author brand. What does that mean? People always ask, what does that mean
Yeah.
to you?
Well, to me, and I didn't write this until just a few months ago because I
Right.
don't think it really hit me over the head that, gosh, I've got a brand. I'm like Kellogg's, or I'm like, Purina Dog Chow or something. I don't know, but when someone buys my books, they should know kind of what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And I love writing about diverse I love writing diverse characters for a
Mm-hmm.
diverse audience. I like really getting into the nitty gritty of characters, especially the ones that have been left out, especially the ones that have been ignored in
Forgotten.
traditional,
Mm-hmm.
forgotten. And I don't know. I guess I look at that in so many ways, not just in my writing, but also in how I choose, or what I choose to put on the cover.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, a brand is like, okay, Bruce Bishop as a brand is not literary fiction. It's not heavy duty stuff that you're going to have to belabor over, and you're going to have hopefully a good time reading my books.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Hopefully you'll be affected a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
either emotionally or just you'll have a few laughs or whatever. But as I say, literary fiction is not what I'm doing, and I don't aspire to that either.
Mm-hmm. I'm just scrolling around so people can see some of the of what you speak. So all of your books, sort of the main character is, in my opinion, a person who would normally maybe not be featured or highlighted, in your typical
Mm-hmm.
historical fiction. And so what I hear you saying is that it really does drive you.
Oh yeah, and because I write beyond who I am,
Mm-hmm.
I always get sensitivity readers before even the final draft of the
Mm-hmm.
manuscript. Because if I'm, okay, for example, in this one, Uncommon Sons, if I'm going to have a main character who is a young Lebanese Nova Scotian man, first generation Canadian, in 1935-36 in Halifax. Well,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, I'm not Lebanese Canadian. It isn't 1935-36, and I have to kind of get into the whole heart and mind of that character.
Mm-hmm.
So not only when you're writing a character like that do you research um, what a first generation Lebanese family might have how they might have lived in Nova Scotia during the Depression. You've got to find out about their culture, and then and so anyhow, to make a long story short, I did have a lovely person from the Consulate General's office from Lebanon read the novel before it came out, and she was, I guess, about the same age as I am. I believe she was a Maronite Christian and not Muslim. And the character in the book is also Maronite Christian.
And we're talking about Uncommon Sons here.
Yes, that's right. So once you get the stamp of approval, I would say, from people who you're writing about who aren't like you, then you can kind of move forward. But I don't know if that answered your question.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's really important. And one of the things that I notice in your books, and that other people who have read them have commented to me, is that the depth of your research is very obvious, and so, and I think, you are the type that is meticulous in that. Like, would you say, like, what is your approach on that research piece?
Thank you for bringing that up, because I go crazy with making sure that things are where they should be at the right time in history. So for example, with Grow Up Rory Rafferty, as I mentioned, it's in 1979. It's primarily set in Toronto, although there are some Nova Scotian chapters as well. But you find out the weirdest, littlest things that you forgot about in 1979, like Pringles came out that year. Pringles chips, right?
Wow, I would have thought it was more recent.
No, Flowers in the Attic, that turned into a long series.
Wow.
That was a bestseller that year. Trapper John MD was one of the top TV shows that premiered that year that has long gone. But anyway, and there's the Pepsi Coke challenge happened that year.
Oh my gosh.
So
and these are the things that add flavor, pardon the pun, to the storyline, right?
Yeah. Especially for people who live through it, and we've completely forgotten those things. So I was, oh gosh, and the music, of course. So I wanted to make sure that every single song that I mentioned throughout the course of Rory Rafferty really did either come out in 79 or remained popular from 1978 into 79. I didn't want anybody to ever come back to me and say, oh yeah, well, that didn't happen till the mid 80s. No, it happened that year, damn it, because I looked it up and
I researched it.
Mr. Google helps me a lot.
Oh my goodness. Imagine, like, before Google. Well, and if you and I think back to our early careers in PR and feature writing and all of that research had to be done like in an archives, in a library, and you know what I mean? It was more almanacs and encyclopedias,
Absolutely. Or you had to
national shelf.
or you had to be there, and you having lived abroad and having written travel articles like I have, it's like when you're there, then you can actually check on things,
Right.
But now if I'm writing about, and I did in this book, I wrote about Singapore and Barbados and Manila. I've never been to Manila. So in the chapter about where one of the characters goes to the Philippines in 1979, again, I had to have, thankfully, I have a family friend who is a Filipina Canadian, and she read the manuscript and said, yeah, that's right, except the spelling of such and such is wrong. So that's how meticulous you have to be, because I feel, and I think you do too, as a journalist, PR person, writer, your editor will pick you up on it. So rather than, just be prepared, just do the work.
And I wanted to, you have some inspiration photos on your website. Let's have a quick look at some of the things that inspired you from the very beginning.
I forgot all about this section of the website. This was done primarily for the launch of Unconventional Daughters, my first book, because it takes place from the late 1880s in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, to the mid 1930s. So for me to look up photographs in the archives is important. That particular one is the old high school that burnt down in 1949. This
Oh
is
my
a
goodness.
scene of Yarmouth during Prohibition in the 1930s. And once again, too, thinking ahead to other writers, you're probably going to be asked at some point to talk to a book club or a group of people. These archival photographs, especially if your work happens to be historical in context, is so, they love it. They love seeing pictures of what they've just read about in your book. And this is the old Grand Hotel in Yarmouth that was torn down in the 1960s, but it really kickstarted tourism in Nova Scotia in the 1890s. Anyway, I wanted people to see it really was a grand hotel back in the day. So there's lots that you can do on your website which shows your reader and potential readers how keen you are about your subject matter.
Well, and this, even if you only did this for your own, your own research as you're writing a book, how else are you going to envision or visualize something that doesn't exist in your modern day realm, right?
That's right. I mean, in Uncommon Sons, and as I said, takes place in the mid 1930s. Found out who two of the top movie stars were at the time. One was born in Halifax and the other one was born in New Brunswick. And of course I looked at their pictures.
How convenient.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And then I tied that into the storyline as a speculation. I guess, what if Ruby Keeler came home for Christmas that year? And not that long ago, just as a little aside, a reader in Quebec contacted me and said, love the reference to Ruby Keeler, because he knew that she was a maritimer and he was a big fan of the old silent movies and the movies of the 1930s.
Oh,
so
I love
you
that.
never know who your
You
book
never
is
know.
going to reach. Yeah,
exactly. So be accurate. And even in fiction, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is fictionalized or fabricated or comes from your imagination. But most authors start with what they know, which is the case with Rory, right? So a little more of a parallel and personal experience. So you had that up here. So talk about how that was different as far as, you talked a little bit about the research, but you lived in Toronto at that time, right?
Yeah. And I did have a cockroach-ridden apartment as my first apartment, and it was one room, and it was near the Wellesley Hospital. I mean, those are things when you're 20, 21 years old and you've just moved to Toronto for the first time. You don't forget those things. They might be way in the back of your mind, but when you actually start writing your fiction, then it's wonderful to remember those times. I worked in food and beverage for quite some time in Toronto, and that's after 2 university degrees, because it was hard to get work in, and that was in the 80s. That wasn't in the 70s. So you draw upon your work experience as well. So I put my main character as working as a busboy and waiter and whatever. I remember even at one time, and that I was one time offered a job as a major domo, as a butler to a very wealthy family in Toronto. Those were the days that you'd scour the classifieds in the Globe and Mail.
Right. Circle.
And I circled it and I applied for it and I got it.
Wow.
And I won't say any more on that.
No.
But it was the basis for the wealthy family that is portrayed in the book. In Rory. Yeah.
Right. Did you go back and dig out all your old photos from that time?
I looked, but I really couldn't find any except for a Metro Pass, which is a subway and bus pass from, I think it was from 1981. And I think I showed that to my cover designer, the old bus pass. And I have a feeling that's where he got the, whoops, on this side, the haircut.
Was that your haircut in the early 80s?
I guess because
I love it.
my cover designer is he lives in Greece, in Athens,
Okay.
and we again, self-publishing is so interesting because you do all that beforehand, of course.
Yep.
And I found him through a website that's devoted to authors to find professionals to help them with their books. Anyway, we had many discussions about what the cover was to look like, including the fact that there's an image of the CN Tower that you can kind of see in the background, as well as Toronto City Hall. And I told the designer at the time, Toronto is as much of a character in this novel as are the characters. So you have to incorporate those landmarks on the cover. And I love the cover because it took an awful long time to get to that.
To get to this,
point.
It's a beautiful cover. And believe it or not, we are out of time, but I want to congratulate you again on the launch of Grow Up Rory Rafferty, available now. Where can people get a copy of Grow Up Rory Rafferty?
As it's still the fall of 2024, as this is being taped, for the moment on Amazon in both print version and ebook, or on Rakuten Kobo also as an ebook, and then shortly in the new year I'll have it on a more widely distributed basis.
Excellent. And I also want to encourage people to follow you on social media. Where are you? Where can you be found?
Oh, please. Yeah. On Facebook as I believe it's Bruce Bishop, writer, author. That's on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram quite frequently, and more recently on Threads. And I'd love to contact with people, but especially through the website. That's the best and most reliable place to find me. And there's a contact button there that you can send me a note, and love to hear back.
There it is. I wanted to bring this up because I thought the header was just so beautiful. So it came out on October 31st. So it was appropriate, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Anne. Yeah.
I love that. So follow Bruce on social media, pick up a copy of Grow Up Rory Rafferty or any of Bruce's books on Amazon and Rakuten Kobo. And thank you again so much for giving us the update on what's been going on in your life and on your author journey, Bruce. We'll hope to have you back again soon. I hope you're working on something new.
I am. Okay. And thank you so much for the opportunity, Anne. Thanks.
It's absolutely my pleasure. And thank you all for joining us this week on the author journey. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Bruce, and we'll see you again next time. In the meantime, happy reading and writing. Bye.